Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Jackson.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you, and I hope you took time out to think about the course of your life, and
I did. I did.
What you've done well and what you haven't done well.
Mm-hmm. I got fully into the gap.
The gap. Now, we haven't talked about the gap. We have
not.
No, and the gap is really key to procrastination because when you procrastinate, you think you've failed, because the ideal for a lot of people is that they shouldn't procrastinate.
Yes, that's absolutely true. But we have discovered otherwise.
Yeah. So far, I was thinking before I started the podcast today, we've established that procrastination is a very good thing for two reasons. One is it means you're ambitious, that you have envisioned ahead of yourself something that's much bigger and better than you have right now, probably in the area of capability. And that has immediately tempted you to actually take complete responsibility for bringing around that bigger and better result. And you're immediately faced with the fact that you don't have the necessary capabilities for doing that, and that's why you're procrastinating. So two things. You're procrastinating because you're ambitious, and number two, you've just discovered that there are other capabilities needed besides your own.
And I think you are correct, and that you haven't fully defined what that next capability is. What is that? What's the necessary thing? You know, I had an interesting experience this week, because I look at things where I always have these conversations with myself, and I think, I think about ADD, and what prompted it was I was looking through I have an archive of different things that I've created and over the years, and I came across this, thing that I had created in 1997, and it was just like, really, I was so impressed with the discipline or the execution that it took to actually make this happen, right? And I was thinking back on it. I said to Lupa, I'd like to hire this young man, to to do stuff for me here. And I realized how I used to really get stuff done. It's an interesting mind shift. This particular thing that I'm talking about was that it was a project that I worked on, and I'll tell you about it because there's probably instructional things we can talk about from it. That I was on a flight one time from Toronto to Ottawa, and it was at a time when they were in the Air Canada lounge. They would give out magazines, which they still do now. They have, they put up free magazines, and publishers will send things for people to just take a copy of this. And one of the magazines was a Today's Homeowner magazine. And this was a magazine that for several years was like a, really nicely well done book specific, or a magazine about, home improvement projects and all of those kind of things. But it was a very nicely done thing. And I was impressed by the magazine as I was reading it from Toronto to Ottawa. And I thought to myself, this would be a really great thing for real estate agents to give to their to their clients. And so on the way to Ottawa, I in my journal, actually that reminds me, I should go back to my journal and see the thoughts that I had to make this happen. But I thought, okay, this is something that would be a really good gift for realtors to give to their clients, in addition to a newsletter. If I was to create a newsletter that we could wrap around giving a gift of these Today's Homeowner magazines. And so I called to New York. I called the publisher. I ended up speaking to got into circulation and was able to work out an arrangement with the distribution department to allow realtors to buy 100 or more bulk subscriptions to the magazine, which they would deliver the magazines to the realtor's office. And then the idea was that I would, along with Joe Stump, we were building by referral only at the time. And so the idea was that we would create this supplemental newsletter that would go along with the magazine that would make it super easy for people to have a really great after-sale service program for their clients. And I so I made all those arrangements, negotiated that opportunity with us. Then I put together a whole, what I'm holding in my hand right now is the little booklet that the instructional guide that I put together along with it, your by referral only Today's Homeowner After Sale Service Kit, which was explaining the whole program to people. And then you open it up and here's everything you need to get started right now with your by referral only Today's Homeowner After Sale Service Program. And it's really well written, well thought out thing with illustrations and sample letters for people to send, step-by-step instructions for how to do it, a template for here's where to get it, insert that goes along with it, so that in each issue of the magazine, they would talk about specific projects that you could do or highlight specific products that were new on the market. And I created this here's where to get it template that said, if you like the products and services you see in the magazine, here's where you can get them locally. See this month's cover letter for special offers. And it had a spot for, 8 business cards of local providers to put in there. And then the letter for each month would say, would have the realtor's name at the top, and it would say, Dear Dan and Babs, here's your November issue of Today's Homeowner magazine. Inside the magazine this month, you'll find an article on page 9 about installing ceiling fans. I talked with Julie Livingston at Lighting Unlimited. She agreed to give you 20% off if you want to buy any ceiling fan this month. She's got over 50 different styles to choose from. On page 45, there's a great article about creating a home office, and in the Where to Get It directory, I've included information from a company called Office Concept. So all these things where I've written all of the stuff for people, and I thought this was a really complete from beginning to end project that was, exhibited really great disciplined execution to get this done. And in a way, I thought about that when we had a conversation about going 100 times and about how, I'm probably at 10 or 12 or 15 times the amount of money or income that I was making then. But I was doing more. I was doing a lot more back then compared to now, where I make more money, but I do much less. And it struck me, this was something that I'm not sure how I would pull this off today. you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of...
I almost find it scandalous that I know someone who did that amount of work.
You know, it's so amazing. It's so, yeah. I don't know whether we're gonna, like, I was aghast.
That was another human being. That wasn't the one I'm talking to right now. I mean,
absolutely.
That's Dean Jackson as a cross-dresser.
Isn't that, I mean, and then in that same conversation, though, then in the same vein, I'm looking right now, I've got a copy of each month for my email mastery program, we create a field report. And I'm 4 months into that now, and it's a beautiful 26-page, supplement to the email mastery program that has a beautiful New Yorker magazine-like cover each month with an illustration. And this month is talking about the MOO method that I talked about, the multiplied oral output method, and then other word for word case study emails and great conceptual articles, which I didn't write a word of. You know, it all came from the MOO method here that I say to. I kind of mourned in one breath that I don't know that I'm capable of physically doing what I did then, but in the same vein, I kind of looked at, I'm holding in my hand something that is, similar in the outcome, but I had nothing to do with other than talking.
Yeah.
That was that's a lot of words, but I mean, it was really that. I think there's something there for us to dig into,
Yeah. Well, I'm reminded of how I was operating not 20 years ago, but 15 years ago. That I started creating a set of quarterly documents, which also had CDs, because CDs were still the thing back then. So you had sort of stiff cardboard covers on this document, which might have been, 36 pages, 40 pages, something like that. On the inside, 11 by 8.5 by 11. So
saddle
magazine size. And on the inside front cover and the inside back cover, there were slots, and you could put 2 CDs, and that covered the, it was roughly about a little bit more than 2 hours of audio if I was talking through the contents. And I would write every single word, and there would be illustrations every page, and I would actually do the rough illustrations before the computer artist got to it. And I not only would produce one of these a quarter, I was producing 3 of them a quarter, and I was doing all the work. I was working nights, I was working weekends. As a matter of fact, I'd actually do this work during workshops. Like when I set the entrepreneurs to having small group discussions, and I would go to.
Oh, you'd be working on it in the downtime.
I'd be working. I was doing 2 focus days during one focus day.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you a story here. I was so much in the swing of doing these things that I was contemplating maybe doing a 4th one or a 5th one. And on a Saturday morning, I woke up and Babs wasn't in bed with me. Okay, and I found it very strange. So, we have 2 other guest bedrooms in our house. So I went investigating. After a while, she was, she wasn't up.
You found her.
Wasn't anyone up, and she was sleeping in one of the guest bedrooms, in the bathroom. So I went, and she woke up, and she said, "You're out of control. You're completely out of control." She said, "You're putting you're putting so much strain on our team, plus there's no end to it. She said, you're completely out of control. And it really shocked me. It was like I had been on a binge, and somebody had just reminded me that I was an alcoholic. And I began to realize, it was almost like I was seeing a fork in the road. If I continued the way I was operating, it was going to put my relationship with Babs at risk. And I said, starting tomorrow, I'll stop what I'm doing. I'll start delegating. I'll start cutting back. And I start cutting back. And that's really, I don't think I've ever told you about that, but that's a fateful decision in my life. I was doing so much how, I wasn't even being a who anymore. But I'm doing just as much work today, or I should say just as much work is getting done today as I was 15 years ago, except I'm not the one doing it. So I'm wondering, in you telling your story and me telling your story, whether these were sort of like explorations on our part in how you could put something together. And it left us with a certain knowledge in our minds about how you could actually put things together. But the conclusion after our explorations, things can get done, but we're not the ones to do it.
Yes. That was so immediately I kind of looked at that, and in my mind, I remembered the process of it. I remember the gallery of output that I had in those years, in that period of time. And so two things struck me. One was that I was doing it. I was writing every word of it. I was laying it out. I was writing it as to space, and I was doing the design of it. And I had learned how to use PageMaker, and I look at it, and I look at this like I am actually a pretty competent designer in a layout person on this. I look at this, and I would be happy to deliver this today, and so that got to. So I think about it now that when it was the one thing, because as I was turning to show this to Luba, I actually saw on where I'm sitting right now in the room where I do our podcasts here, on the table where the lamp is here is the edition of the field report number 4, which is even, this document that I was so proud of here is about a 16-page document. And the one that I'm looking at is like a 26-page with that beautiful New Yorker cover and packed with amazing content that I literally did not have. I didn't write a word of it. It came from the transcripts and the content of my email mastery program, which for all what I do in that is I talk. I have the conversations. I do 2 calls a month with members, brainstorming and helping wordsmith their email campaigns, and they come back and share the results. So, over a period of a few weeks, we piece together these complete sequences. If somebody comes and they're talking about this, and I suggest that we try this, and they go test it and come back and share the results. And we've got all that compiled as a case study from the beginning to end, and we put those together in the field reports. And that really that in the way it was like I want to say the word as close as like I was mourning what appeared like my capability back then, and then it was immediately kind of soothed, and almost with a sense of awe that I'm able to produce this without actually having to do the work to do it, to do the howing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I look at, and I know the feeling, the morning feeling that you're talking about here, but really it was me at a more unconscious time of my life. I wasn't really understanding the full picture of what it meant to get something done. I was only looking at it from, a doing standpoint. I have skills like yours, writing skills, layout skills, talking skills. But I see it as it was kind of like learning how to ride bicycle with training wheels. That was sort of my training wheels days, and I look back there. But actually, the last 3 books that I've created in the last 3 months, the greatest pride I have is that I didn't change a word in any of the 3 when they came back from the writer and the editor.
That's exactly what I felt about when I said with a sense of awe, in a way, is that I didn't have to change anything in this document, and it looks beautiful. It's valuable in its content, and it's, I'll say, written beautifully, but it's written just as an adaptation of what I actually said, So I get it. But I was kind of going down this path of comparing those 2 times in my life, and both in history too. When I look at the difference between 1997, which I think this was 1997. Let's see what the thing, but the copyright 1998. So I was working on this in 1997 for release in January 98. So I was looking 20 years. I was thinking about what was the environment and the situation around me being able to do that, right? So if I look 20 years ago,
I'd like to say it was a different world back then. I remember.
That's my point.
Because that was the old Terminal 2. You were flying out, if you were going to Ottawa, you were flying out of Terminal 2. And they had that really nice cocktail lounge, where you went. And it was very subdued. I don't even go to the lounge anymore because it's substandard compared to the way it was 20 years ago. The Air Canada lounge, but it was a print world. It was the final stages of the print world, where you would have those kind of magazines, and it was just before the internet came in a major way. 98 is sort of when, 98 is sort of the real emergence of the internet. So you were catching a form of communication at its final stages, and you were catching it right when it was at its top in terms of the kind of product that could be produced. It was glossy, it was beautifully laid out. You had top-notch skilled people, and you were taking advantage of that. But if you had stayed with that, you would have been in real trouble.
They're absolutely right. Yeah, you are absolutely right. And those were the one thing that you just said was really my key observation about it was, back then I started thinking about what the circumstances that led to that in the first place, which is very funny because that period of time, 20 years ago, I remember something that Dan Sullivan shared with me back in 1996 or 7 when I first discovered Dan Sullivan, that was the idea of flying first class all the time, no matter what. That was a new kind of thought to me at that point. I don't know whether you even remember talking about something like that, but that was, so that was like impactful, and it was sort of right on that was the very beginning of my decision to just fly first class whenever I fly. And so that, when I think about that, that's the reason I was in the lounge in the first place, right? Because of something you said, which is kind of funny and appropriate now that we're having the conversation about it 20 years later. But the fact that the internet was not around, I think that it was much more conducive to engage my mind in deep work, if we'll say that Cal Newport idea, that a good portion of my mind gets engaged in Cloudlandia throughout part of the day. No matter whatever it is, it's no matter whatever the number is of the amount of time, however many Jacksonian units I deploy in being in Cloudlandia on a daily basis, it is 100% or 90% more than it was taking my attention in 1997.
Yeah.
And that my mind was engaged in actually like entertaining itself by doing the work, I think, is a good part of it, right?
Yeah, and in fairness to yourself and I think to my previous self of 15 or 20 years ago, you're always trying to maximize what you have available. I mean, when I look at myself, I'm trying to maximize with the skills that I have what's available to me in terms of capabilities that will connect me with the world.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was it. That was it in 1997, 1998. And but you have to be alert to the fact that things can change. When I think of my agency days, so I came to Toronto in 1971 to serve as a copywriter with BBDO, big global agency with their Toronto office. And, it was a big deal for me to, jump right from college to a job in a major ad agency. And I had an in. I knew a person who knew a person, and that's how I got the deal. And when I look back at how work was done in those days, when you looked at the copywriting, when you looked at the layout, when you looked at checking proofs and everything like that, what used to take a week on the part of 6 or 7 people now takes one of my artists 3 or 4 hours. Because they have the computer software and hardware now to replace the work of 6 or 7 people. From 40 years ago, 45 years ago. And and that's the biggest thing that you have to be aware of as you're going forward as an entrepreneur, is how is the relationship between who and how switching all the time.
Yes.
We haven't actually talked about this, but the thing is that what is a how for you right now is going to be a how for somebody else in a period of time. So whatever is a big how for you right now, a year from now can be a how for someone else. And what you have to remember to be the who all the time in the situation. You're the who that knows what needs to be done, and you're the who that needs to know why what needs to be done. And if you can communicate the why and the what needs to be done, there's always going to be some other who will do the how.
And I think that, if you take it back to that if somebody understands the why, that they could almost replace you as the who in terms of finding the what's, it's really, I'm almost like I've been watching these history of Hollywood kind of documentaries. I saw one about Barry Diller. Yeah, and you start to realize that there's another level up, like at the mogul level, that when you look at it, that, you know, the guys who have own the studio kind of thing are, as the investors, are putting a guy like Barry Diller at the head of the studio to make the decisions as to what movies to make. And then at every layer down, there's a who's doing the how, while the guys like, you know, Sumner Redstone and Barry Diller before or after he, you know, started his big company, that those guys are at the highest level of that, where they're setting a context, or they're setting that agenda. The why is this is a movie studio, and we're going to produce movies for a profit that tap into the zeitgeist or tap into what the movie audience really wants. And the studio head is in charge of finding, you know, talent and directors and people who can write and make the movies that will tap into that. So it's kind of like you can always go all the way up. You can always up level yourself from another the who position in a way, you know?
Yeah, and I think that you got to be freed up. To have your antennae out and picking up signs that the landscape is literally changing under your feet. I mean, it's not a question. You know, it's one thing to have really good maps. It's another thing to have maps that are kind of moving. You know, you can, you know, as you look at the map, streets are being rearranged and intersections are being rearranged, and and everything. I was thinking about that for Babs and I are big Netflix fans, and we actually went to a movie. Last week was sort of a free week for us, so we went to a movie, and we went to see Isle of Dogs.
I want to see that.
It's fun. It's really fun, and it's actually got an enormous amount of very negative press because of cultural appropriation. You know, as the usual. You know, first of all, it's slightly making fun of Japanese culture. You know, but in a fun way. I mean, I think the Japanese, if they had a sense of humor, a Japanese person would find it actually really, really funny. And what it is about the exiling of dogs out of a city in Japan because they have types of unpleasant behavior. So all the dogs are put on an island, and a boy whose dog is taken away from him goes and saves all the dogs and comes back and makes everything good. And anyway, but it was very funny, and it's that Pixar type of animation, you know, where, you know, you can see all the hair on the dogs sort of blowing in the wind and everything. Beautiful, beautiful animation that they can do now with once Pixar made its mark on the world. But anyway, then at nighttime, we're watching this series, 16 Hours, and it's a German program, a German series called Babylon Berlin about Germany in 1929, just before the Nazis came in. And, you know, it must have been one of the most wildest, wide open, scandalous cities in the world depicted. And I'm just sitting there and I'm watching that, but they're giving me 16 hours to get a handle on the characters, get a handle on the plot, which there are many. There's lots of different plots going on. Yeah. And I was saying how Hollywood is not capable of that these days. You know, that the Netflix has become the center of creativity in the world. It's taken it away from Hollywood. These are not made in Hollywood. This was made in Germany. It's German subtitle. It's German language with English subtitles. And I said, I'm much more willing to watch this, devote 16 hours of my time, than to take a chance on going for an hour and a half to watching a Hollywood-made movie.
Yeah. And that's what's really, it's funny how,
it shifts.
These kind of, and it's really, because, Netflix, that's, you think about as an outlet for creativity and for people who are able to produce these kinds of things, that they can do things that would otherwise not have an outlet, just like you're saying there, right? Like that would not be something otherwise that would be released anywhere. Where would you put something like that?
Yeah, and I saw a series. I saw a series before that, which was 18 hours, called The Last Kingdom, which is a slice of English history in the 9th century, in the battle between the Vikings, who were pagans, and the Christian Anglo-Saxons. And I said, Hollywood, that would be laughed out of the first creative meeting that you would ever try to. And yet it was fascinating. It was fascinating to me. So they've cracked a code where Hollywood more and more is into, cartoons with people's voices, or really silly comedy, but they can't take on really meaty stuff anymore. It's impossible for Hollywood to take on meaty stuff, because it can't be more than 2 hours.
Right.
But in the Netflix model, it can be 100 hours.
Yeah.
If the subscription goes, and you can follow plots and characters over years. You'll stick to it for years and everything like that. So it's almost like they've cracked the literary codes. In other words, that Netflix have seen that Hollywood got so far away from the novels that gave rise to Hollywood in the first place that they couldn't do it anymore, and so it went back. So this new medium with the internet and being able to watch it at home on subscription just gives vast amounts of money and creative license for people to do that. And I don't know if a Barry Diller will exist in the future, because I think the model is going away from the studio boss. I wonder,
it's an interesting model, as I was thinking about that all the way down the line kind of thing. And I was comparing it, your role at Strategic Coach now versus your role at Strategic Coach, 30 years ago, where, and the wisdom of building it as a separate thing as opposed to Dan Sullivan, personal coach, right?
Yeah.
Where that was, I think, the first piece of wisdom was creating it as something separate from you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the big thing for me was that I was very conscious, if I go back to the 1980s, because that's really where this whole notion of coaching really started to take root in the business world. Before 1980, it was a very marginal, kind of a very marginal activity, being a coach to entrepreneurs. One is there really weren't coaches to entrepreneurs. It was, I was holding on to the cliff by my fingertips for about 7 or 8 years, just getting monthly money to pay the rent and everything like that. And what I noticed, and fortunately I was looking for it, I was looking for some sort of breakthrough on the computer realm, because up until that time you just had mainframes, and then I was trying to think of what was the name of the company that got quite famous in 70s, and they had these medium-sized computers. DEC. I'm trying to think what the name of it was. But there was a period, and they had these sort of, the mainframes filled up a room, but this would just fill up your kitchen. You know, it was. I think it was DEC, DEC, or something like that. It was a smaller computer. And I was just thinking, and predictions had been made that at some point there would be something that was just on your desk, and it would be an individual computer. And then around 78, I think, is IBM with the first.
That's when I remember getting my first digital watch and my digital calculator. Those were the big things.
Yeah. And Atari, Commodore, all were making an attempt to break into the personal world, and I think that's where Jobs and those guys all started. It was like mid-70s, between 70 and 80, and they, they didn't have any power. They didn't really have any memory. They didn't have really good printers for them and everything else, but there was enough of a foothold that people would devote themselves and money to get into it. And then the IBM came out with a personal computer, and that was the real breakthrough. And then Apple followed after that with their, the first Macintosh, first Apple and Apple II, and everything like that. And you were off to the races. And I had a feeling, even when I got into the coaching business in the early 70s, 74 to be exact, that the whole future of coaching was going to depend upon entrepreneurs having personal computers. But it took a long time. It was 9 years before they did. And then I had the insight that you didn't want to sell yourself as a personality. You wanted to sell a process, some sort of thinking process. Yeah. So because if it was just the personality, then you only got paid when you showed up. But if you had a system, then other people get paid for it. So those two insights, the fact that it had to be based on the entrepreneurs being empowered with computers, and that what you had to coach was thinking processes. And that's really been the basis for, since the 80s for me.
Yeah. I don't know whether you've heard me talk about the distinction between the Blue Man Group and Siegfried and Roy.
Yeah. I think what was that? I think it was Fortune magazine or Forbes magazine. But they
Forbes magazine, where they had.
I think it was Forbes that wrote this great article. Be a Blue Man, not Siegfried and Roy, because Siegfried and Roy, the tiger attacked Roy during a show. Actually,
it
turned out
that wrote that. So that was me that wrote that concept. What I read in the magazine. That I was reading the top entertainers and saw that Siegfried and Roy had just signed a new contract at the Mirage that would finish out their career.
They had 400 employees in that.
Yes.
It was the biggest show in Las Vegas. It was the biggest show anywhere.
What struck me was their contract was for $35 million a year. Yep. And before that, they did 8 shows a week for 42 weeks. And for 40 weeks a year, sorry. And so basically we got 3 months off, and we're working, all the time, 2 shows a night for 4 nights a week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that, to me, then I saw the Blue Man Group was in there at $70 million, $69 million they had made. And that's when I realized that they had a cadre of 34 blue men and concurrent shows in Las Vegas, Chicago, Toronto, London, Paris. They had all these shows all over the place, and the guys that created it didn't perform anymore. And they just did things like the Grammys, or they ran the empire themselves. But I wrote in my newsletter about the precariousness, of Siegfried and Roy, like the difference, not the danger of it, but just the difference of the fact that they have to do all this stuff that when you only go, when you go to see Siegfried and Roy, you're expecting to see Siegfried and Roy. When you go to see the Blue Men, you're going to see Blue Men. So I wrote about that distinction as a difference in my idea of whether you're building your business as a personality business or a system business. And I just happened to write that, literally 3 months before Roy was mauled by a tiger. And that became, then it was really the whole precariousness of that.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing was not only was the audience demanding that Siegfried and Roy be there, so were the tigers.
Yes, right, exactly. Yes, that's right.
Ladies and gentlemen, we just want to alert you that Mr. Roy isn't here tonight, and would somebody who's got a familiarity with wildcats, could you come up out of the audience? We'd like you to stand in to that.
Just by a round of applause. Who loves cats?
Let's have a round of and as it turns out, in Roy's explanation anyway, he said that the tiger was worried that there was a mentally deranged person and was picking up on something strange, and he wasn't attacking Roy, he was saving him. He actually, in the best way that the tiger knew how, he just grabbed him and took him off stage, because his master was, there was a woman in the front row or something, the way that he explains it. But the tiger, his training broke. The tigers were tame until their training broke, and then they were wild. And
Chris Rock actually said it perfectly. That people say that the tiger went crazy. He said that the tiger didn't go crazy. The tiger went tiger. He said that the tiger went crazy the first time it got on the bicycle. That's
so great. Talk about an upside down world there.
Exactly. The tiger didn't go crazy. He went tiger.
Take a survey among tigers and ask them what they think is crazy here. Boy. But it was really interesting. It was very poignant. That tiger was taken to the Las Vegas Zoo, where they had wildcats, and Roy, as soon as he was able, went and visited with him every day until he died. The tiger died about 5 or 6 years after the incident. But he said it wasn't his fault. He said it was the precariousness of the act. Which I always thought was fairly precarious, and quite apart from the business model part of it, it's just it's a very fine line between them being a tiger and them being an act.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they got the big bucks, but the whole point is, if a tiger ate a blue man, you'd never know about it.
That's exactly right. That's the point. That's exactly it. And so this whole line of thought, Dan, has really been, it's been quite a reflection through the week here. I was trying to think back on the, and how to, harmonize that in a way with things like, speaking of great documentaries, I really love that Jiro Dreams of Sushi documentary. And this whole idea of that mastery of of something, that that's a it's a whole different thing, and it was a really interesting, like, complex mix of feelings that this stirred, that whole juxtaposition of what I went through in 1997 to create that I was very happy with, compared with creating the email mastery field report, which I had much less to do with, but I'm equally proud of. And so I wondered about, like how that loss of sort of, I've heard you talk about it as art and craft in a way, I was thinking.
Well, I think, as an outside observer watching you, that you're much more of a artist than a craftsman today. That 1998, you were mastering certain crafts, and you could put one craft together with another craft. I mean, if you put together all the sequencing that you talked about earlier in the conversation, you put a whole bunch of crafts together that you had known from marketing. But I'm thinking. I went to Rome. I really love Rome. I've been there 4 or 5 times, and the master artist of Rome is a sculptor by the name of Bernini, and Bernini did a lot of the Vatican work. Tremendous number of the fountains around Rome are from Bernini, and you get a feeling when you hear about Bernini, if you don't do any investigation, that this guy never slept. He must have been working 24/7 for 50 years to do this. But then you start digging down and you find out that Bernini had 10,000 craftsmen who worked for him. And he was a conceptualizer of large projects, but he drafted and enrolled great stone carvers and people who were gifted with hydraulics that could bring water into fountains and everything like that. And he was a master salesperson, and he was he was a colossal enterprise. He was probably one of the biggest enterprises in Rome. But it was kind of like Chihuly, the fellow who did
like glass
work at the Bellagio. Well, if you go to the Bellagio in Las Vegas and look at the lobby ceiling, it's one of the most magnificent pieces of glass work ever done on the planet. And it's his idea, but he lost sight in one eye 20 years ago, and he can't do glass blowing. He started off as a craftsman who was a superb glass blower, but he lost sight in one eye and couldn't do glass blowing because you have to have both eyes to properly blow glass. So what he did is he attracted glass blowers, but he was the person who got the contracts, and he developed the concepts, and he had a way of laying them out in such a way that the artists could match it with glass. And so he's much more of an artist today than he was 20 years ago when he was a master craftsman.
Yeah.
Just like Bernini.
And because,
it's like, and Michelangelo too, and
really?
Raphael.
I didn't realize that. So
they didn't do all the work. They had ear guys, and they had nose guys, and they had eye guys, who could. They had fabric guys who could do very parts. They would do the rough work, and then there would be other artists.
I think there's Jeff Koons is like that too. The artist, and Damien Hirst, same kind of thing, and even Andy Warhol was maybe one of the earlier of those. Maybe not if you're saying Michelangelo had that figured out back then.
Yeah. Yeah, there. I mean, so my feeling is Walt Disney was originally a cartoonist, but that wasn't going to get him anywhere, and the filmmakers. So many of the filmmakers were the original filmmaker, but then they became, the studio heads, and so my feeling is the trick here is that you're always being faced with the fact that the who-how landscape is changing all the time, and that the real power to be in charge of what's happening lies in always taking the next elevator up to the next level of who, and then attracting people who are able to do the hows around you. And I think procrastination is getting caught between floors.
Wow, that is pretty brilliant, actually.
For a while. I mean,
that's pretty profound. It's like straddling is what it is. That is, it's like it's straddling the floors. Yeah. The one you've just left isn't the future anymore, but you haven't arrived at the next one yet, and then you're kind of suspended between floors. And I think to know that that's happening is more useful than not knowing what's happening. Period. Yeah. Boy, that even visually, when you think about that, that's something.
Yeah, and you have to be alert.
This will be an interesting
and this is the reason why you have to. Yeah, and this is the reason why you have to have slack time. One of my statements that I communicate to my entrepreneurial workshops all the time is that tightly scheduled entrepreneurs cannot transform themselves. If every amount of your time is tied up with the present level of how things get done, you'll never transform yourself into the next level of being the who plays a bigger game.
Yeah. You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, that's wow.
You have to give the impression to the outside world that you're not fully applying yourself.
I know. It's my magic. That's my magic formula. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Boy, I do about, what do? I do about 12 workshops a quarter, and people say to me, well, would you have time to do 25? And I said, I'd have time to do 30. And they said, well, why aren't you doing them given what you're doing? And I said, well, because that would be a trap.
Yes. I like that a lot. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I think I sense that, man, you're just so right on with that trapped between levels, between floors. As I think about that, it's like because it almost is a little bit, I think I've shared with you before that often I'll look at it and with kind of awe and say, I really don't functionally do much in my organization here. Aside from the talking, yet it's continuing, it's growing. We're doing our best work.
And you're always coming up with breakthroughs. Yes.
And the velocity, which I feel like, I kind of like this idea of, I guess when I think about something new, there's a couple of projects that I think about that I want to be that guy that, created that Today's Homeowner program is what I need for here. And my thought was, how can I make that, my thought, even just today in having the conversation that's still forming, is how can I get that outcome without me having to go back 3 levels to be the one that actually does it, Like, admire that work for what it was. And it was a great part of the learning process that got me here. But not now. I need to be able to executive produce that kind of outcome. And how you think about it, that I can find somebody, there's a who can do that, because in that situation, I was a who.
Yeah.
I mean, when I look at it there, it's like I was doing that stuff in as my collaboration with Joe Stone.
Yeah.
He was 10 years older than me, and so but found somebody like me, and that's there's somebody like me 10 years earlier here that could be that kind of thing for me.
And there's talent. There's talent all over the place. This is a topic because we're at the end of our hour here, but I get my hair cut most Saturdays. I get trimmed. So I've always liked having short hair, and I get trimmed. And so I go to a hairdresser. It's a man by the name of Kim Du, who actually was an escapee from Vietnam after the communists took over the South, and actually he was caught his first two attempts when he was 14 and 15 years old, but wasn't harmed or anything. They just caught him and took him back, and then on his final trip he actually made it away. He just wanted to get out when he was 15 and came to Canada, and went into the hair trade, school, and then got a position, and then about 5-6 years ago started his own salon, and so I've been with him over that period. Great guy, and tough guy too, to have been through what he was through. But he's got this young woman on weekends who's a trainee at sort of the schools now are starting work-study programs when they hit about 15 or 16 years old, and she's just so smart, and she's kind of really present, and she's got a great sense of humor, and she's learning really, really quickly. And I said, smart people are being born all the time, and she's got I could tell. I was just watching her sometimes, and she's got, she's very present. She's very alert. She's very curious. And I said, it'd be interesting to see what she's going to be doing 10 years from now, because she's just trying this out. It's just a chance to earn money and, get out into the marketplace and everything like that. But I said, there's young people who are 40, 50 years from now who are going to be much better howers than we ever were when we were at our best. And it's not our role to compete with them.
Yeah. It's not our role to compete with them. Wow, that's what a way to end. That's a good ending for this one.
Yeah. And next Sunday, I'll see you in our Chicago house.
That is exactly right. Yes, I'm really looking forward to that.
And I think Eleonora is going to send you exact directions on how to get there. So during the week, you'll get exact directions on how to get there.
I love it. Perfect. And I'll get from her
the
official hotel and stuff. Cool. Okay.
All right.
I'm very excited. Have a great week, and I will see you next week.
All right.
Bye.
See you then. Bye.